Hey everyone, I'm Dr. B, aka Merciless. Today we're talking about Native Americans and food. Haven't you all wondered what Native Americans ate for dinner? Well, I'm going to share with you 5 facts about indigenous food systems everybody needs to know. Let's get into it. Fact number 1, indigenous people revolutionized agriculture and gave the world some of the most important foods. Nearly 60% of the foods that we eat today come from plants cultivated by indigenous peoples of the Americas. Native peoples didn't simply survive off the land. They mastered agriculture and protected and enhanced the biodiversity. This relationship that indigenous peoples had with their homelands gave the world some of the most important and amazing foods. Let's run through a brief list of indigenous food powerhouses. Let's start with corn. This amazing crop took generations to develop, and it fed millions of Native Americans across the Western Hemisphere. This food was first developed in ancient Mexico, and it would spread north, south, east, and west. Next is potatoes. That's right, Native Americans developed literally thousands of varieties of potatoes. So let's all stop calling them French fries. Let's refer to them as native fries. What about tomatoes? This food was first developed in Central America, and think about it. No tomatoes, no salsa, no ketchup, no pizza. Pineapples, blueberries, cranberries, chili peppers, peanuts, and avocados. Again, this is just a brief list of all the amazing foods developed by indigenous peoples throughout the Americas. Hold up, we can't forget about cacao, aka chocolate. This was first used by the Maya and the Aztecs in ceremonial drinks long before Europeans even knew chocolate existed. But one of the most brilliant agricultural techniques ever developed by indigenous peoples was the 3 sisters: corn, squash, and beans. These 3 crops were grown together in perfect balance. Corn grew tall, acting as a natural pole for the beans. Beans climbed the corn, adding nitrogen to the soil to keep it fertile. And the squash would spread across the ground, blocking weeds and retaining moisture. The 3 sisters method wasn't just efficient and sustainable, it would feed millions of indigenous communities across North and South America. And modern sustainable farming is just now catching up to these methods. Indigenous peoples were way ahead of the game. Fact number 2, colonization would devastate indigenous food systems. With the arrival of European settlers, indigenous ways of living, including indigenous food systems, were systematically destroyed. One of the most extreme examples would be the destruction of the American bison by European settlers and the federal government. They deliberately killed and slaughtered millions of bison to subdue the tribes of the Great Plains. Surviving Native Americans were then forced to live on Indian reservations where they were introduced commodity foods like flour, sugar, and lard. The federal government even went so far to ban indigenous people from eating their traditional foods. This has had serious consequences on the well-being of indigenous peoples. It has led to health issues like diabetes and heart disease, which still affects indigenous peoples even today. Thankfully, Native communities are fighting back, reclaiming their food systems, and restoring ancestral knowledge. This leads us to fact number 3. The indigenous food sovereignty movement is bringing native foods back. This movement is about reclaiming traditional foodways, growing native crops, and restoring food independence. Organizations and groups like the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network and the First Nations Development Institute are working hard to revitalize native agriculture. This movement is more than just about food. It's about the land, our health and well-being, and of course, indigenous sovereignty. Indigenous peoples everywhere are taking back control over what they eat and how they nourish their communities. This is called decolonization. Fact number 4, returning to traditional diets will improve our health and well-being. Prior to colonization, indigenous peoples were some of the healthiest communities on earth. Returning to our ancestral diets is not just a powerful form of decolonization, it's powerful medicine. Studies show that when Native people cut out processed foods and return to a traditional diet, rates of diabetes, obesity, and heart disease drop significantly. But it's not just about avoiding disease. It's about thriving, about reconnecting with your homelands through harvesting and consuming the foods of our ancestors. Fact number 5. Native American chefs are reclaiming Native cuisine. Across the country, Native chefs are leading a food revolution. People like Sean Sherman, the Sioux chef, Crystal Wapapa, and Neftali Duran are bringing indigenous foods back to the table without colonized ingredients like dairy, wheat, and processed sugar. If you live in the Bay Area, you gotta check out Wapapa's Kitchen. These indigenous leaders are proving that Native cuisine is not a thing of the past, and that you, as a Native person, can reincorporate these foods back into your diet. I got a bonus fact for you. Indigenous food systems hold the key to climate solutions. Indigenous agriculture, indigenous food systems are the key to fighting climate change. Think about it. Before colonization, Native people cultivated crops in ways that preserved the biodiversity and maintained healthy ecosystems. Traditional indigenous knowledge is the key to a more sustainable future. Modern industrial agriculture is destroying the land, but indigenous agriculture, like the Three Sisters method, is not only sustainable, but it helps preserve and enhance the biodiversity. This is essential for everybody's survival, not just indigenous communities. This is why indigenous knowledge is crucial for the fight for climate justice. Indigenous food systems aren't just about the past, it's about our present and the future of the 7 generations coming. The fight for food sovereignty, the health and wellness of our children and our elders, the fight to protect our ecosystems and our climate is ongoing. So let's stay in the fight and let's keep this conversation going. I'm Dr. B, aka Merciless. Stay informed, stay connected, and definitely decolonize your diet.